Mad yasya yato niviyad itaratas charte swavigyaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adhikavaye Muyaktayat Suryaha Tejo Varimadam Yata Vinimaya Yatrati Sargo Misha Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi
Dhamna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi.
O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O all-pervading personality of God.
O all-pervading personality of God.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universe.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universe.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he's independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
It is she only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge into the
The
heart
original
of Brahmaji,
living being.
the original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
Of water seen on fire or land seen on
of
water.
Water seen on fire or land seen on the water.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Temporarily manifested by reaction to the three modes of nature.
Temporarily manifested by the reaction to the three modes of nature.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Which is forever free from the illusory representations in the material world.
Which is forever free from the illusory representation of the material world.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute
Dharma
truth.
Pujita Kaitavutra.
Dharma Pujita Kaitavutra.
Paramo Nimatsranam Satam.
Paramo Nirmasharanam Satam.
Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu.
Vedyam Vastavam Astra Vastu.
Shivadam Tapa Trayamulanam.
Shivadam Tapu Trayamulanam.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Kimva Purishwaraha.
Kimva Purishwaraha.
Sadyo Hridi Avurudyatetra.
Sadyo Hridi Avurudyatetra.
Kriti Bihi Sususabhistakshana.
Kriti Bihi Sususabhistakshana.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth.
This Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
The highest truth is the reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in its maturity.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in its maturity.
Is sufficient in itself for God realization.
It's sufficient itself for God realization.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
By this culture of knowledge.
By this culture of
the
knowledge.
Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Sukhamukad amrita dravya samyatam.
Sukhamukhar amrita dravya sangitam.
Pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam.
Pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam.
Muhur aho raska bhavibhavakaha.
Muhur aho rasika bhavibhavakaha.
O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam.
O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam.
The mature fruit of the desired true Vedic literature.
The mature fruit of the desired true Vedic literature.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all.
Including liberated souls.
Including liberated souls.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna.
Punya Shravana Kirtana.
Punya Shravana Kirtana.
Vidyantaksto hi Bhadrani.
Vidyantasto hi Bhadrani.
Vidu Nati Suhitsatam.
Vidu Nati Suritsatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures.
To hear about Krishna from the very glory source.
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita.
Or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita.
Because it's self-righteous activity.
It is self-righteous activity.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
And for one who hears about Krishna,
Lord Krishna, who's dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone's heart.
acts as a best wishing friend,
Acts as the best wishing friend.
and purifies a devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
And purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing with
Nasta
him.
presu abhadresu
Nasta praishwa bhadrishu
nityam bhagavata sevaya
nityam bhagavata seva
bhagavati uttama-sloke
bhagavati uttama-sloke
bhaktir bhavati naistiki.
bhaktir bhavati nastiki.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dharma
As
transcendental
he hears
knowledge.
more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the
As he
devotees,
hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees,
he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
he becomes fixed in devotional service.
Tadarajastamo bhava
Tudarajastamo bhava
kamalobhadayaschaye
kamalobhadayaschaye
cheta etayaranavidam
Chaitaitaranavidam
stitvam sattve prasidati.
Stitam Sadve Prasidati.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional
one
service,
becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion of
and
ignorance.
thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
And thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
Evam prasana manaso
Evam prasanna manasa
bhagavat bhakti yogataha
Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata
bhagavat tattva vijnanam
Bhagavat Tattva
mukta
Vijnanam
sangasya jayate.
Mukta Sangasa Jayate.
When these impurities are wiped away,
When these impurities are wiped
the
away,
candidate remains steady in the position of pure goodness,
the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness,
becomes enlivened by devotional service,
becomes enlivened by devotional service,
and understands the science of God perfectly.
and understand the science of God perfectly.
Vidyate hridaya grantis,
Vidyate Rudaya Grantis,
chidyante sarvasamsaya,
Chidyante Sarva Samshaya,
shiyante chasyakarmani,
Chidyante
krishna
Satkamani,
evatmanishvare.
Druta Evatmanishvari.
Thus, bhakti yoga severs the hard knot of material affection,
Thus the Bhakti Yoga serves the hard note of material
and
affection
enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
and enables one to come at once to the stage of Asamsham Samagrama,
understanding of the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead.
understanding the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotees in Krishna consciousness
can one understand the science of
can
Krishna.
one understand the science of Krishna.
Canto 2, Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, verse number 11. All the different kinds of worshippers of multi-demigods can attain the highest perfectional benediction, which is spontaneous attraction, unflinchingly fixed upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by the association of the pure devotees of the Lord.
Maharaj, you skip Sanskrit?
What? Oh yeah, sorry. Itavan eva yajatam
Kritavan evariyatam
iha nishreyasodaya
Srinamishayasura
bhagavat achalo bhavo
Bhagavad Achalo
yad
Abhava
bhagavata sangata.
Sangata.
All the different kinds of worshippers of multi-demigods can attain the highest perfectional benediction, which is spontaneous attraction, unflinchingly fixed upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by the association of the pure devotees of the Lord, purport by Srila Prabhupada. All living entities in different statuses of life within the material creation, beginning from the first demigod, Brahma, down to the small ant, are conditioned under the law of material nature, or the external energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity in his pure state is conscious of the fact that he is a part and parcel of the Lord, but when he is thrown into the material world on account of his desire to lord it over material nature, he becomes conditioned by the three modes of material nature and thus struggles for existence for the highest benefit. This struggle for existence is something like following the will-o'-the-wisp under the spell of material enjoyment. All plans for material enjoyment, either by worship of different demigods as described in the previous verses of this chapter, or by modernized advancement of scientific knowledge without the help of God or demigod, are all illusory. are illusory only. For despite all such plans for happiness, the conditioned living being within the compass of material creation can never solve the problems of life, namely birth, death, old age, and disease. The history of the universe is full of such plan makers, and many kings and emperors come and go, leaving a plan-making story behind. But the prime problems of life remain unsolved, despite all endeavors by such plan makers. Actually, human life is meant for making a solution to the problems of life. One can never solve such problems by satisfying the different demigods, by different modes of worship, or by so-called scientific advancement in knowledge without the help of God or the demigods. Apart from the gross materialists, who care very little for God or for the demigods, the Vedas recommend worship of different demigods for different benefits, and so the demigods are neither false nor imaginary. The demigods are as factual as we are, but they are much more powerful due to their being engaged in the direct service of the Lord in managing different departments in the universal government. The Bhagavad Gita affirms this, and the different planets of the demigods are mentioned there, including the one of the supreme demigod, Lord Brahma. The gross materialists do not believe in the existence of God or the demigods, nor do they believe that different planets are dominated by different demigods. They are creating a great commotion about reaching the closest celestial body, Chandraloka, or the moon, but even after much mechanical research, they have only very scanty information of this moon, and in spite of much false advertisement for selling land on the moon, the puffed-up scientists or gross materialists cannot live there. And what to speak of reaching the other planets, which they are unable even to count. However, the followers of the Vedas have a different method of acquiring knowledge. They accept the statements of the Vedic literatures as authority in toto, as we have already discussed in Canto 1, and therefore they have full and reasonable knowledge of God and demigods and of their different residential planets situated within the compass of the material world and beyond the limit of the material sky. The most authentic Vedic literature, accepted by the great Indian acharyas like Sankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnuswami, Nimbarka, and Chaitanya, and studied by all important personalities of the world, is the Bhagavad Gita, in which the worship of the demigods and their respective residential planets are mentioned. The Bhagavad Gita 9.25 affirms, Yanti Deva Bhutan Devan Prichin Yanti Pritivrita Bhutani Yanti Bhuteja Yanti Madhyajino Pimam. The worshippers of demigods reach the respective planets of the demigods, and the worshippers of forefathers reach the planets of the forefathers. The gross materialist remains in the different material planets, but the devotees of the Lord reach the kingdom of God. We also have information from the Bhagavad Gita that all the planets within the material world, including Brahmaloka, are but temporarily situated, and after a fixed period they are all annihilated. Therefore, the demigods and their followers are all annihilated at the period of devastation. But one who reaches the kingdom of God gets a permanent share in eternal life. That is the verdict of Vedic literatures. The worshippers of the demigods have one facility more than the unbelievers due to their being convinced of the Vedic version, by which they can get information of the benefit of worshiping the Supreme Lord in the association of the devotees of the Lord. The gross materialist, however, without any faith in the Vedic version, remains eternally in darkness, driven by a false conviction on the basis of imperfect experimental knowledge or so-called material science, which can never reach into the realm of transcendental knowledge. Therefore, Unless the gross materialists or worshippers of the temporary demigods come in contact with the transcendentalists like the pure devotee of the Lord, their attempts are simply a waste of energy. Only by the grace of the divine personalities, the pure devotees of the Lord, can one achieve a pure devotion, which is the highest perfection of human life. Only a pure devotee of the Lord can show one the right way of progressive life. Otherwise, both the materialistic way of life, without any information of God or the demigods, and a life engaged in the worship of demigods in pursuit of temporary material enjoyments, are different phases of phantasmagoria. They are nicely explained in the Bhagavad Gita also, but the Bhagavad Gita can be understood in the association of pure devotees only, and not by the interpretations of politicians or dry philosophical speculators. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All the different kinds of worshippers of multi-demigods can attain the highest perfectional benediction, which is spontaneous attraction, unflinchingly fixed upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by the association of the pure devotee of the Lord. So, this is a very good summary of things that we have studied previously. And Prabhupada is stating facts, real facts, not phony facts like we learn in schools and in newspapers and in universities and things like that. So, first of all, everyone, from Brahma down to the smallest microbe, are conditioned under the law of material nature. So what does it mean, conditioned under the law of material nature? Well, the law of material nature says, or dictates, that there's birth, old age, disease, and death. That's a law. No one can violate that law. No one in the material world can violate that law. So therefore, if that's a law, what does it mean? It means that, first of all, there's a lawmaker. Laws are made by lawmakers. Two, no one can breach this law. No one can ignore this law. So when you have these jokers that say they're going, in 2050, death will be optional, old age will be optional, sickness will be optional. They're crazy. They're lying. They don't know what they're talking about. They think that there's no God and no laws governing the universe. And that's their illusion. So, Abrahma bhuvana loka punaravartina virjana mama petitu konteya punarjanma navidyate. So in the 8th chapter, 15th verse, it says that from the highest planet, Brahmaloka, down to the lowest, all are places of misery. And wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. So that law of nature that Prabhupada is talking about in this purport is stated right in the Bhagavad Gita, 8:16. So, next important point is the living entity in his pure state is conscious of the fact that he's part and parcel of the law, but when he is thrown into the material world on account of his desire to lord it over material energy, he becomes conditioned by the three modes of material nature and thus struggles for existence for the highest benefit. So basically, this desire to dominate and enjoy independent of God has an immediate consequence. One, we cannot stay in the material world, the spiritual world. Two, we're put in a material world where we can play out this fantasy of trying to be independent of God. But we're conditioned in order to play out this fantasy. Number one, you have to have a material body that's different than the soul. Number two, that body is conditioned by the three modes of material nature and subjected to the laws of nature, such as birth and old age, disease, and death. Or another way of saying the same thing, there's one is born, one grows, one stays and maintains, one gives off byproducts, in other words, children, one begins to dwindle, and then one dies. So this is the law of nature. It happens to everyone. No one can escape it. See? Even Jesus Christ, he died on the cross, and then he resurrected from the dead. But he had to die, you see, because that's the law of nature. So when we desire to enjoy independently of Krishna, and how do we enjoy? By dominating nature and people in the material world, we become conditioned. What does that mean, conditioned? Well, number one, it means we're limited, severely limited. In the spiritual world, we're unlimited. But in the material world, we become severely limited by the body. And the body is completely controlled by the material nature, which is an agent of Krishna. And the controlling factors are the three modes of material nature. So, who realizes this? Nobody realizes this, because they're in a state of illusion. The illusion is, I am this body. The illusion is, goal of life is sense gratification. These are all false ideas. These are all implanted in the mind as a result of rejecting Krishna's instructions and authority. So then what happens? When one is conditioned by the three modes, they begin to struggle for existence. But it's completely unnecessary to struggle for existence. It's only an artificial imposition on a living entity. Just like someone commits a crime and they're convicted, and then they have to go to jail. So now their freedom is severely restricted, and they have to struggle in the jail. There's a whole new set of rules and culture in the jail. See? And most jails are horrible, and all kinds of horrible things happen while one is incarcerated. Okay, so this struggle for existence is unnecessary. It's an artificial imposition. And therefore, what happens in the struggle for existence? The whole thing is based on illusion. One thinks that sense gratification is a goal of life, and then they begin to compete with many other living entities for sense gratification. Right? You have human beings and different levels of human beings, and you have animals, and you have bugs, and snakes, and reptiles, and fish, and things like that. And it's a struggle for existence. Everyone's struggling, from the lowest living entities up to the highest. So, for example, you're outside in the summer, you get in the evening, you get bit by a mosquito, right? So the mosquito wants to suck your blood, and sticks a pin into your skin to get to the blood, and he injects an infection in your body, and that infection can go from simply an itchy, let's say, red, like a pimple, to death. You can get bit by a mosquito that has a disease like cholera or malaria, and you can die from it. Just one little mosquito, right? So we see there's a struggle for existence. The mosquito needs your blood, and the bacteria, different bacterias and funguses, and then poisonous things like anthrax. All those things are everywhere. I mean, anthrax is in the ground. If you have a wound or a cut in your finger and you're putting your finger in the soil, you can get anthrax and die rather quickly. There's so many ways people can die. In fact, one lady here in Sammamish was bitten by a bat. Do you know there's bats around here? If you get bitten by a bat, if the bat has rabies, you could die very quickly, like in 1 or 2 days. You'd have to get shots immediately, and they would have to try and kill that bat and analyze if it has rabies or not. So some lady right here in Sammamish was bitten by a bat a week ago, and they rushed her to the hospital and gave her the anti-rabies shot so that she doesn't die. But every year in the United States, I think about up to 40 people die from being bitten by bats. So a bat is a flying rat, basically. But the bat's special because it eats with its mouth and it passes stool from its mouth. Did you know that? It doesn't have an anus. It passes stool from its mouth. So you can imagine how contaminated. And the mouth is already, even in human beings, the mouth is already contaminated, almost as contaminated as the anus. But in case in a bat, it's full of those vicious germs. Right? So if they bite you, they can attack human beings. It happens all the time. Okay, so this is struggle for existence and amongst all the different species of life. And then what is the struggle for existence is something like following the will-o'-the-wisp under the spell of material enjoyment. So everybody, all the living entities want to enjoy. But their whole endeavor for enjoying is illusory. It's called will-o'-the-wisp. Will-o'-the-wisp, what does that come from? It's a Latin term called ignis fatuus. Ignis fatuus means it's referring to an atmospheric ghost-like light seen by travelers at night, usually in areas where there's swamps or bogs because of like the stench or of rotting matter. Fermentation is taking place, usually in the summertime. So what happens? It creates an illusory light in the distance, and travelers get confused by that light and try and walk toward it, but they end up lost, and there's no real light there. It just appears like that, and it misleads travelers. And therefore, this will-o'-the-wisp, or this ignis fatuus, has a metaphorical meaning to it also. Just like Prabhupada uses it here, he says that the struggle for existence is something like following the will-o'-the-wisp. In other words, you see this light in the distance at night, and you go toward it thinking maybe there's some people there, or there's a house there and I can get some shelter, right? But there's no real light there. It's just a ghost-like appearance due to this steam and stench coming up from these swamps due to fermentation. Okay, so the metaphorical meaning of will-o'-the-wisp, and there are different names in different languages, but for the same thing. the metaphorical meaning of it is it refers to hope or goal that is impossible to reach. A hope or goal that's impossible to reach. So Prabhupada says that this struggle for existence is something like following the will of the wisp under the spell of material enjoyment. So the material enjoyment is the will of the wisp, or this illusory ghost-like appearance of light that misleads a traveler at night, and it misleads people to think that I can become happy in this world materially without any reference to God. See? And that's what 99.9% of the people are doing. And they ultimately fail. So then Prabhupada says, all plans for material enjoyment, either by worship of different demigods, as described in the previous verses of this chapter, or by modernized advancement of scientific knowledge without the help of God or demigod, are illusory only. For despite all such plans for happiness, the conditioned soul being within the compass of material creation, that means under the strict restrictions of material nature, like you're restricted to a material body that's temporary and subject to being conditioned by the modes of material nature and forced to struggle for existence and in severe competition with other living entities. Therefore, one can never solve the problems of life, namely birth, death, old age, and disease. But yet the idiots are promising us that they're going to solve these problems, something that's impossible to solve. They're claiming that they'll do it. They just have to wait. It's going to happen in the future. And if you die in the meantime, oh, well, tough luck. But maybe if you take a lot of supplements like Ray Kurzweil is doing, you may live long enough to be saved by science. The whole thing is a hoax. It's false, it's nonsense, but yet people want to believe it. You have to believe something false in order to continue in material life. See? The history of the universe is full of such plan makers. Yeah, like Mr. Kurzweil. They're plan makers, they're politicians, they're scientists, and kings and emperors. They all come and go, leaving a plan-making story only. Right? So in the United States, you had Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who came up with the Great Deal, was it? And the New Deal. You know, each new president has another name for it. The New Deal, the Great Deal. In other words, to solve all the economic problems and social problems, they come up with a plan. You know, a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and they all fail. They all just give false hope to the people, and they ultimately all fail. Okay. So then Prabhupada says, actually human life is meant for making a solution to the problems of life. Yes, what are problems of life? Birth, death, old age, and disease. One can never solve such problems by satisfying the different demigods, by different modes of worship, or by so-called scientific advancement in knowledge, without the help of God or the demigods. So why does it say, or the demigods also? Well, they can help to a certain degree. Now, if one worships a demigod, but not for sense gratification, but to get the mercy of Krishna, the demigod can help you. Yeah, to get the mercy of Krishna. But if you worship the demigod for sense gratification, you go deeper and deeper into material conditioning and illusion. So the demigods, let's say, mercy is two-pronged. For the nonsense people, they go more into nonsense. And for the good people, the demigod can help them go toward Krishna. Right? Just like Brahma. He's he has the Brahma Samhita. He's telling you how to go to Krishna, right? But persons like Ravana were also worshipping Brahma, right? And Hiranyakashipu was also worshipping Brahma. That was in order to become immortal. But Brahma can't give that, right? So they were shortchanged. They were cheated, in a sense. Okay, so then, if we understand that the real goal of human life is to solve the problems of life by becoming Krishna conscious, and taking the advice of Krishna. Krishna is the creator, so he knows how things work and how to get out of the entanglement. The entanglement is only there because we chose it out of ignorance, or out of being attracted to something that is illusory, like the will-o'-the-wisp. Okay, so then it says, apart from the gross materialists who care very little either for God or for the demigods, the Vedas recommend worship of different demigods for different benefits, and so the demigods are neither false nor imaginary. Yeah, demigods actually exist. The demigods are as factual as we are, but they are much more powerful due to their being engaged in the direct service of the Lord in managing different departments in the universal government. So demigods are basically devotees, but they still have mixed desires. Therefore, the difference between a demigod and a demon, although both may be engaged in sense gratification, is that the demigod will always, in the most let's say severe conditions, turn to Krishna, whereas the demon never turns to Krishna. Let's say, so the demigods at least have that one saving grace, that they will surrender to Krishna when they're in deep difficulty, whereas the atheists and the demons, like Hiranyakashipu, like Hiranyaksha, like Ravana, like Sisupala, like Dantavakra, and they won't turn to Krishna. They'll always reject Krishna. So therefore, they're always put back into different species of life, birth after birth, to suffer more. So the demigods are as factual as we are, but they are much more powerful due to their being engaged in the direct service of the Lord and managing different departments in the universal government. The Bhagavad Gita affirms this, and the different planets of demigods are mentioned there, including the one of the supreme demigod, Lord Brahma. The gross materialists do not believe in the existence of God or the demigods, nor do they believe that different planets are dominated by different demigods. They are creating a great commotion about reaching the closest celestial body, Chandraloka, or the moon, but even after much mechanical research, they have only very scanty information of this moon, and in spite of much false advertisement for selling land on the moon, yes, they were doing that in the 1960s, real estate agents in New York started plans to sell properties on the moon. That's how illusioned and crazy they were then. In 1968, 69, it was in the newspapers. I remember reading it, that certain realtors in New York were beginning to map out prime locations for purchase on the moon. Why don't you look that up? You just see how stupid people are, right? And people are actually believing it. Yeah. And then it says, much advertisement for selling land on the moon, and puffed up scientists or gross materialists cannot live there. And what to speak of reaching the other planets, which they are unable even to count. Yeah, there's innumerable material planets in this one material universe, and there's innumerable numbers of universes. So how are these people going to reach these places or go there? It's nonsense. Prabhu, one thing, there were only 2 trays of potatoes to cook, but there were another 3 trays on the shelf. That's not for today, right? Okay, I didn't cook those. However, the followers of the Vedas have a different method of acquiring knowledge. That's a major point. What is this different method of attaining knowledge? Well, this is explained in Srimad Bhagvatam, 1st Canto, 9th chapter, 18th verse. Esavai Bhagavan Shakshad Adya Narayana Puman Mohayan Mayaya Lokan Gudas Charati Rishnisu. So this different method is explained in 1.9.18. And the verse says, this Sri Krishna, this is spoken by Bhisma Pitamaha to Yudhisthira. This Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni, just like one of us, and he's bewildering us with his self-created energy. Okay, in the purport, Prabhupada says, the Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process. Okay, that right there is a difference between the Vedas, the Vedic system of knowledge, and the mundane, speculative system of knowledge called material knowledge. Material knowledge is mostly based on inductive reasoning. That is, you have a hunch, you do a lot of experiments, you try and recognize certain patterns, and you make a theory based on certain patterns that you may have noticed in your experiments. So that's the ascending process, aroha. But Vedic knowledge process is descending, avaroha. And it's based on deduction rather than induction, or rather than experiment, observation, experiment, and hypothesis based on patterns that may be noticed through the experiments. So the Vedic knowledge is received perfectly by disciplic succession from authorities. Such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. Then Prabhupada gives the mother example. It says, the mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. She is the authority for such confidential knowledge. Therefore, authority is not dogmatic. In the Bhagavad Gita, this truth is confirmed in the 2nd verse of the 4th chapter. And the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. The very same system is accepted universally as truth, but only the false arguer speaks against it. For example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky, and when the scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted modern scientists as authorities. That's the point. Knowledge begins when you accept someone as an authority. It's not that you're going to discover knowledge on your own. Yeah, you can discover certain things by experience, but you usually take advantage of the experience of others. But the Vedic process is evam parampara praptam imam rajasayo vidu sakalina mahata yoganasta parantapa. Krishna says, this supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. So this is the Vedic way of knowledge, as opposed to the materialist empiric way of knowledge. And then Prabhupada says, the very same system is accepted universally as truth, but only the false arguer speaks against it. For example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky, and when the scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted the modern scientists as authorities. The authorities speak and the people in general believe them. But in the case of Vedic truths, they have been taught not to believe. Even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated because they've been misled. So, this is a very important point to understand the Vedic process of knowledge as opposed to the empiric, materialistic process of knowledge. And this is the point. People talk about knowledge all the time. They don't know what knowledge is. They talk about it, but they don't know what knowledge is. Knowledge, real knowledge, is knowledge of your relationship with Krishna, because it liberates you. Janma karma chame divyam ivam yo veti tatpata tyakva deham punar janma naitimam eti sarjana. So, if one understands the mysterious nature of Krishna's appearance and pastimes, then when one dies, one does not come back again, but goes to the spiritual world, just by dint of that transcendental knowledge. Okay, so the followers of the Vedas have a different method of acquiring knowledge. They accept the statements of the Vedic literatures as authority in toto. That means they don't accept part of the Vedic knowledge. This part they accept, that other part they don't accept. They accept the whole thing. In toto means completely. Not one statement is challenged. And he says, as we have already discussed in Canto 1. Well, that's this verse, 1:9-18. Okay, so Bhisma Dev is one of the 12 Mahajans who know the principles of transcendental knowledge. His confirmation of Lord Shri Krishna as being the original personality of Godhead is also corroborated by the impersonalist Sankara. All other acharyas have also confirmed the same statement. And thus, there's no chance of not accepting Lord Shri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Bhismadeva says that he is the first Narayana. There are millions and millions of Narayanas in the spiritual world. Krishna is the first one. The example given in the Brahma Samhita is that there's an original candle that lights up many other candles. Once they're all lit, you can't tell the difference between them. But you know that there was an original one. So that original candle is Krishna, and all the other expansions of Krishna are coming from him. See? So that is real knowledge. And Bhisma says that he is the first Narayana. This is also confirmed by Brahmaji in the Bhagavatam 10:14-14. The same statement that Bhisma makes is corroborated by Brahmaji in 10:14-14 in the Bhagavatam. Krishna is the first Narayana. In the spiritual world of Vaikuntha, there are unlimited numbers of Narayanas who are all the same personality of Godhead and are considered to be the plenary expansions of the original personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. Okay, so this is real knowledge. We have no way of understanding what's going on in the spiritual world, Krishna's pastimes, Krishna's expansions. There's no way we can understand it because it's transcendental. It's beyond the purview of material observation. So how are we going to understand? So then Prabhupada explains in this purport, the bewilderment regarding Sri Krishna is due to the action of his twofold internal and external energies upon the third one is called marginal energy. So there are two types of, let's say, bewilderment, or two sources of bewilderment. One is the internal energy of Krishna, and the second is the external energy of Krishna or Maya. And we are the marginal expansion of Krishna. In other words, we can go either on the Krishna side or on the Maya side. So therefore, sometimes we're bewildered by the internal energy, and sometimes we're bewildered by the external energy. Just like in the spiritual world, when there's Rasa Leela dance, the gopis are bewildered, in a sense, because they think that Krishna is only dancing with them, but actually he puts himself between two gopis. So each gopi thinks he's dancing only with her, right? And in the material world, we're illusioned by Maya. We think, I am this body. And because I am this body, the goal of life is sense gratification. And therefore one begins to struggle for existence, for sense gratification, and gets bewildered. So Krishna expands himself. So living entities are sometimes bewildered by the internal energy and sometimes by the external energy. By internal energetic bewilderment, Sri Krishna expands himself into unlimited numbers of Narayanas and exchanges or accepts transcendental loving service from the living entities in the transcendental world. And by his external energetic expansions, he incarnates himself in the material world amongst the men, animals, or demigods to reestablish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhisma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. So if we become serious about serving Krishna, we can become free of these two types of illusion or bewilderment and always be clear in our understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so then there are other points made. We'll go over the rest of the points tomorrow. This is another one of those very long purports with many, many fundamental truths explained. And it helps us understand what's come before in the Srimad Bhagvatam. This purport is very, very useful for understanding, having what you call a more global understanding or comprehensive understanding of what we have read so far up till this point in the Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Are there any questions? Yeah.
How one can come out from the mixed desires?
Okay, how can one become free of mixed desires, like sometimes sense gratification, sometimes Krishna? Is that your question?
Yeah, even one has a knowledge, but still the mixed desires, even not acting on it, but the desires.
So one may have knowledge.
But for one, the person is not even acting on those desires, but the desires are there.
And material desires.
And mixed desires.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point. You don't act on those mixed desires or false desires for sense gratification. The desires are always going to come. You can't stop it. That's explained in the second chapter, Bhagavad Gita. It says, Puyamanam Achalam, which is just like rivers are going into the ocean, so many desires are coming into the mind constantly. Puryamanam achalam pratistam samudram apa pravisanti advat tadvat kama yam pravisanti sarve sasantim apnati nakama kami. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So, before you act on those desires, the desires are going to come into mind all the time. You can't stop it. All kinds of material desires. But you can't stop them from coming into the mind, but you can stop yourself from acting on them. And that's only because you keep hearing every day. bona fide knowledge. Because every day the desire is going to come into the mind. But just like you might see a nice car, right? And you think, my car's getting old, I should buy this new car. But then you can think, yeah, but my car's been serving me very nicely for so many years, and it's easy to repair when it breaks down. It doesn't break down often at all, but it's easy to repair. So what's wrong with it? Why should I have to get a new car and get a loan and have to make payments every month when this car is paid for already? And the maintenance to keep it running is actually not very much. It might be $600 or $800 a year. I have to do some maintenance. But that's worth it, because if I bought a new car, I'd be paying $400 or $500 every month. So it's cheaper to keep repairing the older car than to buy the new car. Unless your motor dies or something like that, then it becomes, or it's costing more than $1,000 a year for maintenance, then you might think about buying a new car. So you have to make these type of decisions, right, in life. So the desires are going to enter. You can't stop them. But you can't stop them from entering, but you can stop yourself from acting on them. And the only reason you have the strength to stop yourself from acting on them is hearing every day this transcendental knowledge. You notice how Prabhupada is repeating over and over again why people fall down from the spiritual world and what's keeping them in the spiritual world, right? And it goes deeper and deeper in explaining the actions of Maya, so you can recognize it when Maya is acting on you, and therefore you don't fall victim. You don't fall victim to the will of the wisp, these lights in the darkness that lead you to nowhere, right? Or pursuing goals that are not achievable, such as living on other planets, going there and living there, or such as trying to make the body immortal. These are all impossible goals. But out of illusion, people believe that they're possible. Okay?
Nanjay Prabhu has some message.
Yeah.
He's saying there is a website called lunarland.com. You can buy an acre of moon for $29.95.
And apparently they sold millions of acres. And it's an active company even now.
Right now.
Yes,
And how much is an acre?
$30.
That's cheap. I can't get that in the United States, man. Maybe I should buy an acre in the moon.
And you can set up a farm there.
Yeah, we set up a community there. Oh, but wait a minute. No, there's no Home Depot there. Yeah. You see how crazy people are? And they've sold thousands of acres?
And yeah, they sold millions of acres.
Millions.
Millions.
Wow.
And they're saying in the near future,
That means all those people actually believe that it's fact, that they'll end up having property on the moon.
yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Shiva. Maharaj, my question is at what stage or how pure we should be so that we are more attracted towards Krishna and we don't get attracted towards Maya?
Well, what stage? That stage is attained every day by coming to class. The more you hear, to avoid falling into the trap of following impossible desires. Right? This constant hearing, that's what's being recommended. Stane statak strutikatan tanavan manobi. Lord Brahma's statement that just stay in your position and hear and chant constantly in the association of pure devotees. That's the solution. That way, you're not attracted by achieving goals that are impossible to achieve, such as being immortal in the body, such as thinking that by sense gratification you'll be happy. But the law of nature is, the more sense gratification you have, the more misery you receive. So you have to believe these statements. If you don't believe the statements, then you'll keep trying, right? And the more you try, the more you get entangled. So why does Prabhupada repeat over and over again? The reason we fell down from the spiritual world is because we wanted to be an independent enjoyer by dominating some part of nature and dominating people. Well, he repeats it over and over again. Every 4 or 5 pages, he repeats the same thing. It's hard for us to understand. Although the English is simple, but it's hard for us to understand because we're so addicted to being dominated that it's hard to give it up. But when we accept to be dominated by Krishna and take Krishna's instructions and follow them, then we're free of the whole problem.
Maharaj, when we say pure devotee status, at that time also they will still get the desire? But
Yes. Yeah, Lord Chaitanya says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says, even when I look at the wooden statue of a woman, I get agitated. Not a real woman, just a statue, a wooden carving of a woman, I get agitated. But that doesn't mean you act on it. So that verse, 2nd chapter or the 70th verse, it said there's an incessant flow of desires always coming into the mind. But if you engage in the regular hearing and chanting and the association of devotees, you won't act on it. That's where Krishna consciousness works, on the level of thinking, feeling, and willing. Before you get the willing, you stop this desire because you see through it that, if I do this, then I'll violate my vows of initiation, and that means I violate my relationship with Guru and Krishna. Why would I do such a thing when I promised not to do it? So, you don't be surprised that the desires are coming, but be very happy that you can have the strength not to act on those desires. And you just act on the desires